Hey everybody, it's the Progress Report. Here we are live, and that's the way you got to look it up on YouTube, folks. Progress Report Live, because we're there, we're live, and we got a great show lined up tonight. I apologize last night. We did not have last week, I should say, we did not have a show. I was ailing, and I apologize to my good friend Lou D'Alessandro, and to Pat Long was going to be our guest. But we got a great guest tonight. He is James McKim, the chairman, president, whatever it is, of the Manchester chapter of the NAACP, and we got a lot of great stuff to talk about. But in the meantime, my good friend Mike Farley has some kind of hometown thing to talk about.
Important cultural announcement. I am very pleased and very grateful to Mayor Craig for having proclaimed the month of March as Irish American Heritage Month in the city of Manchester. The mayor has been great working with the Ancient Order of Hibernians in declaring March Irish Heritage Month in Manchester for many years.
Of course it is. Look at that.
Yeah, that's the proclamation right there.
Oh, you paid for that?
No, we do not. No, we request it. We explain all of the great contributions that people of Irish heritage have made to the city of Manchester, including building the mill yard and digging the canals, among other things.
Oh, I thought it was just green beer.
No. That actually is an offensive stereotype.
Oh,
Bob, but,
I'm sorry.
We try to avoid that.
I'm just having fun.
But I also want to point out that the governor has also declared Irish Heritage Month in the state of New Hampshire. So that's a big thing. We're very grateful to both of those leaders for doing that, and we hope you folks celebrate your Irish heritage and the Irish heritage of your friends for the whole month. Don't forget our parade on the 28th of March.
And we will have a parade show as we do every year on the 22nd. And we look forward to that. That's a good show every
26th.
time.
The parade's the 26th. I'm doing my math in my head, and I'm no good at that.
So, okay.
So thanks for the time to do that, Bob.
Okay, and was there something else you wanted to do before we get our guests going?
No, I do have a couple visual aids, but I think we'll let the conversation go, and if we get to the topics, we'll put up what we have.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to welcome back to the Progress Report Jim McKim, a Goffstonian, a Dartmouth graduate, and he is the chairman of the NAACP chapter here in Manchester. Is it Manchester or is it statewide?
It's Manchester. I don't get that promotion. I'm not at that high pay grade yet.
Okay, in any event, he is a wonderful, wonderful person that has accomplished a lot and has a lot to offer. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll launch into some of the topics we were discussing.
Well, after I graduated from Dartmouth, or was graduated to be grammatically correct, with degrees in computer science and philosophy, I went to work for a big company that many people may remember called Digital Equipment Corporation.
I remember.
I worked for Digital back in the day.
I think at one time they were the biggest employer in the state of New Hampshire.
Biggest employer in the state of New Hampshire, and the second largest computer company in the world, only second to IBM, with 360,000 employees worldwide.
No kidding.
So I'm really a technologist. Most of my career has been spent in the world of technology, and I still actually do consulting in technology.
I'm going to remember that. I'm going to call you with something.
Yeah, when your phone doesn't work, Bob.
Your phone doesn't work.
My phone doesn't work.
Give me a call.
I give you a call. Go ahead.
So I spent years with DEC. I founded a couple of companies, went to work for Dean Kamen in his foundation, the first robotics competition foundation, for a number of years as chief information officer. So most of my life has been spent in the technology space. But also working with the Episcopal Church in the space of racial reconciliation, and got to the point where the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church has asked me to be chair of the Executive Council Committee on Racial Reconciliation.
Yeah.
So I have a national role there with that aspect. And lately, in the last 4 years now, I've been able to bring my passion for business and organizational performance, along with my passion for racial diversity, equity, and inclusion, together. And most of the time, my day job is as a consultant around organizational performance.
So how did you come to New Hampshire? If maybe
College.
maybe you're a native.
College.
Dartmouth did
Dartmouth
it.
College.
Dartmouth did it. Okay.
I came from Charleston, South
And-
Carolina,
and-
to go to college here in the cold north.
and what appealed to you that kept you here?
Well, you get your first job out of college, and then you meet your wife.
Okay.
right.
So was she maybe a native New Hampshire person?
She was born in Danvers, Massachusetts, but
Oh, that's
she
close.
grew up in Bedford most of her life.
Really? Well, wonderful. We're so glad you're here and contributing so much. Let's see, Mike. I'm going to.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to talk about. We had
I know,
some
I
great
know.
conversation
I know.
before.
we got a
Let's
obviously
kind
great
of
guest.
format the show. What we want to focus on, why we have you here, is the situation in Manchester, in New Hampshire. Now, one big issue, and there's more we'll talk about, but a big issue statewide that's come up is the National Democratic Party changing our primary, or at least in their rules. They can't change our state law, but attempting to move our primary back. And the reason we've heard in arguments against us going first for years and years has been an utter lack of diversity. And so South Carolina is going to be bumped ahead because I think it's clear they are much more diverse than New Hampshire, or maybe you disagree with that. But how do you address that? I mean, I grew up in New Hampshire. I'm not a native, but I grew up in it because my parents weren't both born here. You got to have everything, both parents and you.
Right.
Oh, come on.
Oh, yeah.
For at least 3 generations, too.
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah, But in any event, I grew up here, and, there were not a lot of minority people in my schools. It looks like that is a good argument. But lately, New Hampshire's changed.
So this is really interesting to me because, of course, as I said, I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, right? So, but I live here. So this is this weird thing going on with my brain
You got to
about
put up with winter.
Right. I put up with the winters. So we do have in the state a trend of becoming more racially diverse, and I use that term racially diverse to specifically talk about racial diversity. We should also be talking about more than just racial diversity when we look at the demographics and how we decide who our leaders are. But having said that, we went from before the 2020 census being, we were 7% minority to 15% in the 2020 census, which you think about it, 15% may not sound like very much, but that's 200,000 people in this state.
And if I'm not mistaken, Jim, you can tell me if I am, it's not too far below the national rankings.
Well,
is it?
so the
I mean, what is the black colored population of the United States? Oh, about 18%?
so people of color were at about 40%.
What?
Think about it this way. I think it's 20, they keep moving the post here, but by about 2045 or so, we're going to be what is referred to as a majority country.
Yeah, but I'm talking about right now, the last census.
Last
What
census
what
was
is
15%.
the population that identifies, well, we got all these categories. We got Hispanics, we got, Asians, but of people identify as black Americans.
It's about 8%, 8 or 9%. People who identify themselves as black or African American, right?
In the United States of America?
Here in New Hampshire.
Oh, how about in the United States of America?
United States, it's about, I think, 18 or 20 somewhere.
So
around
we
there.
are still low on that
So
scale.
we're still on that scale.
Okay,
but,
all right,
but
that's what I was
to,
getting at.
To Mike's point, though, looking at the demographics of New Hampshire, which is the reason why the Democratic Party has said they want to move, part of the question is, where do you find a state that matches the demographics of the country?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
that's
perfectly, yeah.
And
I
you're not going to find
You're not
one.
going to find it's a
So
fool's errand.
Let's start with that
Yeah.
notion. And
Yeah, I agree.
But next, if what they really want is to identify where they can see what the black vote is going to be.
Yeah.
Oh, you've got a population of 200,000 that you can sample from, and they're
Well,
identical.
so the 200,000 is people of color, so
Oh,
that's
okay,
blacks
okay,
and
so
everybody.
smaller
But
than that,
still, if you think about Census Tract 15, right here in Manchester, New Hampshire, the demographics there, in terms of the percentage of blacks, is actually closer to what the country is. So if you really, you could make the argument that you can still have New Hampshire be the first, and you can get the sense of what the black vote would be by looking at those census tracts in, there's like 3 or 4 census tracts in Manchester, in Nashua, and Portsmouth. You can see what the black vote would be.
I hope Ray Buckley's watching our show. Watch it on YouTube. By the way, folks, I just have to want to say again, our show, you haven't been here since we upgraded, but our show is available on YouTube.
Right.
His wonderful daughter will put it up by Friday.
By Friday, usually by Friday.
Friday's afternoon,
Right.
and it's available on Spotify and
As a
Instagram
podcast, yeah.
Yep.
as a podcast. Really terrific.
So, but there's another point about the primary that I think we need to get out here.
Let's do it.
is
That's
that,
why we're here.
So think about this. We have the Republican Party, which presumably will continue to hold its primary, and it will be the first in the nation. We have the Democratic Party, which is trying to move it. So what happens? What happens when you split that, if you even try to split that, right?
And I think the Democratic Party is going to lose that one.
Well, and that's where you get into the party calculus here,
yeah,
right? So I think that's another interesting aspect to look at with this push for the Democratic Party to be to move the first in the nation primary.
Is there anything to be said? I've always felt that even back when I was a kid, when New Hampshire was even more Caucasian than it is now by percentage, but there was a social awareness in New Hampshire. At least I feel that way, and maybe I'm kidding myself, but that you wouldn't find among the white population maybe in another state, say down south. Yeah. There was a more of an acceptance. It was. How do I put it? The population hadn't arrived yet, but we were ready to welcome them. You understand what I'm trying to get at?
Right?
I guess.
Whatever that means. You can make that mean anything you want.
But I think what it means is that people wanted to live their lives without being interrupted by government,
and allow others to do that as well, too.
Same thing.
That's
right?
the point,
and,
I guess you're saying. Yeah.
And there wasn't this fear. I mean, fear and to some degree shame is a part of what keeps people from interacting with one another in terms of different across the races, right?
Really?
And the fear just isn't as great here, wasn't as great here, and it's becoming more now because there are more people. I mean,
it seems to be the pattern, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. So there's that notion of the threat.
Yeah.
That is more prevalent now because there are more people of color than it used to be.
That's that replacement theory that haunts us from history. Right?
Yes. Yes.
So, Jim, can we talk a little bit about the role of the NAACP here in New Hampshire?
Sure.
I mean, the role in the country is immense. I remember, what was that organization founded in the early 20th century, right? I mean, it's the oldest civil rights organization in the history of our nation.
1909.
And it was an answer to the dominance of the Ku Klux Klan, I think. And you've taken over the leadership role here. Talk about what your mission is and how you're going about achieving your goals.
So the mission is to secure the educational, economic, and social rights of people of color. And we do that, we actually have about 3,000 branches across the country.
Really?
There are 3,000 branches across the country. There are 3 here in New Hampshire. Mine in the greater Manchester area, there's one in the greater Nashua area, and one over on the seacoast.
How about a statewide NAACP?
There is not a statewide NAACP. So the way we're structured, there is this notion of a state conference of branches, but we don't have a state conference. We have what's called a New England area conference because we're so small. So all the branches across the northern New England states come together as the New England area conference. And so any issues.
So do you meet sort of annually?
We meet on a quarterly basis, actually.
Really?
Right. So when issues come up that are statewide in nature or New England regional in nature, NAACP is what it's called. NAACP comes into being and advocates for equity and equality of rights at that level, so at the state level or at the regional level.
And I understand that despite the name is in the National Association of the Answer Color People, NAACP, it's open to everyone.
It is open to everyone. In fact, you can join.
And I will.
In fact,
promise you.
and anyone here can join. Anyone on the watching us can join. We are actually a majority white organization here in New Hampshire. It's not that
Are you
same way.
comfortable with that, or would you like to see that? Not?
It's necessary.
And you know, Jim, that goes back to the question that I was struggling to get out. That is what I was trying to say about New Hampshire. You could have an NAACP chapter in Manchester that has so many white people interested and involved and wanting to work on this issue that it can be the majority in the organization. Right. That's what I was trying to say. Even though the skin color was identical to some people with more intolerant points of view, the points of view are what is important, I guess, is what I was trying to say.
Well, there's that, and so this issue of discrimination is by white people. So it's a problem not created by black people. It's a problem created by white people, and so white
Agreed.
people need to solve it, right? And part of the challenge is white people don't know how to solve it, and they need to lean on people who have been discriminated against to help them to see that discrimination. And then jointly, we need to figure out, well, how are we going to address it? How are we going to eliminate it through our systems and through our interactions?
You just said something that I think is really important, and I hope we can take a few minutes to talk about it.
Sure.
Seeing it first. People can be blind to their own
Absolutely.
Intolerances and attitude. I know that sounds offensive to folks, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but people need to be taught how to see their own blind spot, I guess.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little
Sure. So, and the Latin term is scotomas, if you want, for your academic folks. But we all have our
Hadn't heard that, but I'm happy to hear it.
So we are all biased, whether we like to admit it or not, and our biases come from lack of experience with people who are different than we are.
Right.
And if you want to get more intellectual and neurological about it, our brain takes in millions of bits of data from our five senses every second, every single second. So how do we make sense of those millions of bits of data that flow into our amygdala every single second? Well, we search for patterns. Our brain is taught to search for patterns that are recognizable based on our experience. Well, if our experience isn't that broad, then anything that is not within our experience is going to be flagged by our brain as something we need to fight or flee from.
Potential
A
enemy.
potential threat or enemy.
Adversary.
Right. So with that structure, if we don't have a lot of experience with people who aren't like us, we revert to stereotypes. And the stereotypes of what we hear in the media and what we've been taught
Or from Bob about green beer.
Or from Bob about green beer, right. So,
All right. Mea culpa. Go ahead.
so you know, we've been drilled into us that black males are dangerous, right? Movies, art, media, everything has told us that black males are dangerous. So we believe it, even though a black male sitting in front of us might not be very dangerous at all. That's what's in our head. So if we've not had that experience, one comes before us and we think, oh, it's unconscious.
I better get my defenses
I
up.
better get my defenses up. Whether you recognize it consciously enough, that's what happens. Even though you may not want to
Wow.
act that way, that's what happens.
Yeah.
So in a sense, and there's a great video, the New York Times did a series of videos on bias a couple of years ago, and there was a professor who said, even though we don't know and don't want to be, but we didn't have a chance because we swim in this world that tells us black males are dangerous, that black people can tolerate more pain than others. In fact, this blew my mind when I heard this, textbooks in the medical field actually teach that black people have a higher pain tolerance than white people.
Even today?
Even today, there are textbooks, and we're trying to get those removed from the medical
I
schools.
would think so.
Holy cow.
But even today.
That's just absolutely
Right.
shocking.
So this is the milieu in which we live, and it's why people are biased and don't even know it.
You know, Jim, the last time you were on a show was a long time ago, but it was wonderful as you are tonight. You talked about, and I know this is not an original thought with you, slavery and racism as America's original sin. How are we doing on dealing with that original sin, do you think, in these times?
I think we're getting better. I think progress is made, but I also have to say we've got a long way to go.
You certainly do.
So the fact that that I'm here, I'm sitting here, right? 50 years ago, 75 years ago, I would not be sitting here, right? So progress is being made. We've had a president who was an African American, right?
Pretty good president, too.
Most powerful position in the world. 50 years, 75 years ago, that would not have happened.
Yeah.
So we have made progress.
But we see
But there seems to have been a big
efforts
reaction
to
to that.
dismantle that
Well,
progress.
yes.
Don't teach it. Don't.
Which
Yes.
is why you say the curve of justice is
It's
not
not
just
it's not a straight curve.
It's not a straight curve going up. This
Yes.
it has ups and downs.
It has
I think
ups
we're
and
in
downs, yeah.
kind of a little down dip since President Obama left the White House. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I bring us back to a concrete example? I've got a video
sure.
of something that occurred in Manchester that I know you were very heavily involved in, and I'd like to use it, not to pick that apart, but to use it as an example of, in a city where we think we're doing well, things can still happen, and
Right.
how does that reflect, and what can we do about it? So, Brendan, if you could show that video, and when the news guy comes on, you can cut it right out there. We don't need to hear his
And
commentary.
in Manchester, New Hampshire, a racist sign asking a student from Trinity High School to come to homecoming is making headlines. Black Lives Matter New Hampshire posted this picture of the sign on its Instagram. They say students from the high school sent it to the organization. The sign makes references to slavery. In a since-deleted Facebook post, the private Catholic school said, quote, "One of our students made an extremely inappropriate post on social media. Student disciplinary action is confidential, but I can assure you that swift, appropriate action has been taken, as this type of behavior does not reflect the teachings of the Catholic Church or the mission of Trinity High School." There's still no
We
words.
can end it there. And
there
look,
you go.
I don't want to pile on this kid. He was a kid. And I believe when they say it was a mistake, it was a mistake. But can you enlighten us? How did that play out, and how did we improve ourselves because of it?
So the way it played out was, what can I say? I have to be careful because we have youth involved. I can say that the school and the Catholic district, they did take swift action. There were reports flying around which were actually incorrect, that the student was suspended and expelled. He was not, but I can't say what actually happened. But he was
Understood.
absolutely not at the school after that incident happened.
Understood.
And the district, the school did take what I believe is appropriate action. What's interesting about that situation is that you think about that shot of the young man and his girlfriend. Who took that picture?
It's a question I didn't ask. That's a very good point, isn't it?
Do you know?
We don't know for sure who took that picture, but chances are it was someone in the family who took that picture. So what that says is it's not just the youth. There are parents involved here. Parents who should have known better than
Well,
to take that picture.
that's usually where this starts. I mean, it's
Right.
the whole issue of violence among youth and bullying starts a generation before the perpetrator today,
Right.
right?
So how do we address it?
So how do we address it? We improve in our schools teaching of respect. We improve in our schools teaching of the true history of this nation. And the fact that making statements like that were made on that poster, which, by the way, he didn't come up with originally. He found that poster, what was on that poster, someplace else. Right? So
And I've seen similar things with the social networking that we have now. People
Right.
proudly put this stuff up, and that's the conversation I'm hoping we're going to be having here. Where's the permission coming from?
well, and that's so we parents tend not to want to be too overly involved in their kids' use of social media, which they should be.
Yeah, I
Right?
agree.
And parents, older parents, and there's this kind of a notion that older folks don't know how to use technology. Well, That's somewhat true. And by the same token, there's this struggle that parents have with their kids of, how much do we helicopter over them versus how much do we let them go off and be on their own. And when it comes to social media, parents don't know what their kids are doing.
Well, I'm looking at it. When I grew up, there was no social media, but I had geographic boundaries. There were corners that I had to stop at, and I couldn't go without getting more permission.
Right.
But when you have this in your hand, those corners are around the world.
Right.
There's unlimited access.
Unless you as a parent understand how to use technology, which allows you to regulate what a child can see. Right?
But you don't have to take courses to be a parent. You don't have to be certified in technology to be a parent. You come from that background, and it's very easy probably to understand this stuff. Someone with a history background like mine couldn't do as good of a job.
And this is where, back to your point of what can we do, schools need to be providing the tools for parents.
For parents.
For parents.
There are those that would say, no, schools are to educate the kids.
But parents need to be part of that education process.
I'm not fighting you, but
right,
you know what I'm saying.
Right. And I get it that parents are working. Parents are tired when they come home from work, and spending time with the kids is not necessarily something that parents like to do. But we as parents have that responsibility.
Do you see a lot of this kind of thing in Manchester now or over the past 4 or 5 years?
We don't see a lot of it. It's not prevalent in the youth in terms of posting on social media, but we do see that behavior in schools. We do see and hear about kids who are not being respectful to others, who are using language that is just wash your mouth out with soap. That was what my mother would say. And you wonder where they're getting this language from. They're picking it from the media, and in some cases they're hearing it from their parents. So that's why it's so important, I think, to get parents involved. And this is one of the things that I've talked with Superintendent Jen Gillis about, is that what are we doing to have the school district and the schools really engage with parents?
Yeah. At least have the opportunity. I mean, you're not all parents are going to participate. There are those that just don't have, as you said, the bandwidth, let's say, to be able to do all that. And they kind of count on the school to take care of that component of the education process.
Right.
So what is the major issues that the New Hampshire Manchester NAACP is working on now? Is it working with the police? Is it working with other agencies? What are you mostly focusing on to advance the
mission?
The program of your agency?
So education is a really big. In fact, I just came from the education committee. We have an education committee that focuses on equity in the Manchester School District. So we attend school board meetings and work with Chief Equity Officer Tina Philibot to help her to look at policies and procedures, to work with the teachers and the administrators to figure out how best to teach respect, to teach equity.
Do we teach our history properly to our kids in our school?
We do not.
That's something that really distresses me. I'm a historian guy, a history major, and it bothers me that we're not teaching about the history of this country. It's all about glory and triumph and, the Bill of Rights and, the Declaration of Independence.
Only a few of the Bill of Rights.
Only the first few, right?
All men are created equal. Well, not so equal in those days.
Oh, in those days, right. And that's part of understanding history, that
it is.
It's all contextual.
Yeah.
That the way of the world back in the 18th century is different than the way of the world today.
Yeah.
One of our programs is called Discover for the Culture.
Yeah.
And we have cohorts of students who are being taught the history that they need to be taught, that is not taught in schools.
Yeah.
I want to swing you back to the school
Sorry.
district. You had mentioned the chief equity officer.
Yes.
And that triggered in my mind that we have a big advancement in the proposed school budget that was put out on that front. And I'd really like you to talk about that.
Sure. So people may recall that in 2014, the school district was found being very discriminatory and had to come up with a plan to address the discrimination.
That's right.
And there were 4.
That's 9 years ago, by the way, folks. You know,
Yeah, it's a while ago.
Ancient
It's a while
history in
ago.
our
it takes a
time.
while for things to happen around
Yeah,
here.
well,
I
it
guess.
really does, and it really wasn't until Manchester Proud got involved and got the funding, raised the funds to hire a chief equity officer, which Tina Philibot filled, that some real action was taking place against that.
And there were
that
people
plan.
that were opposed to that hiring.
There were so many people opposed to that hiring because they thought, as you said, we don't have a problem here. Yet we've got how many languages that are spoken in the Manchester School District?
Dozens.
Over 70.
I thought it was 72 was the number that I
Right.
heard last. So yeah.
So
amazing.
It's an issue, and of course, when you have people in power who don't believe it's an issue, they don't want to spend money to do anything, and that's why Manchester Proud's efforts were so important because it brought money from the outside
I'm
world.
glad you mentioned them. I think they deserve a lot of credit.
They absolutely do deserve a lot of credit for making that, bringing that position into existence and raising the issue to the level of.
There were even people with the funding from Manchester Proud that didn't want to do it.
and
didn't
still
want
don't
take
want
the
to do
money
it,
because
and still don't want to do it because they don't believe it's necessary.
Is that the reason, or is it they don't want to see that it's necessary? I mean, I know questioning
It could-
motives,
could be
questioning
both.
motives.
It
Who
could be
knows?
both. It
But
could be
I'm a
both.
real skeptical person, and I often wondered what's driving folks. We have a phone call, which is excellent.
We love our callers. Hello, caller. Welcome to our show. We're anxious to hear what you have to suggest, question, or comment. Go right ahead.
I got a couple of things on the brain, and the number one being we're going to go through this once a year or twice a year ritual of moving the clocks, you know. And from my standpoint, no, they didn't call it standard time for nothing, okay? And the daylight savings is a misnomer. You know, we don't save any daylight. We don't get X amount of daylight on a daily basis, depending on what is the season and where is the Earth on its axis.
Okay, I got your point on that one. What's your second
What I say
question?
is there's more disruption and there's more heart attacks in this 2 time frames than the whole entire rest of the year. And the last thing I want to leave you with, I used to teach night school, okay, and the classes were from 6 to 9, okay, and every fall I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong because my students were falling asleep on me. I thought it was
We hear ya.
wrong. They started work at 7 a.m., okay, and by the time we came to 9 a.m., the system was still on 10. So, you know, I'm totally opposed to moving this twice a year. Just please leave it alone. Thank you.
Thank you for calling. I will
All
see
right.
what I can do about that.
We voted on that in the legislature.
I
a few
always
times.
like
Yeah,
the
you do.
fall back. I never like the spring ahead.
ahead.
So
Yeah,
if we
absolutely.
could do fall back every year, I wouldn't mind
Oh,
that.
absolutely. I'm with you there. I'm absolutely with you.
Yeah.
So listen, we're talking about the city of Manchester. Another issue really troubled me. I'm angry about it. Took place in the Manchester Police Department, and I know that you and a lot of other people were involved in some very fruitful discussions on that, and we'll talk about that. But the issue is, for folks listening, a meme, an offensive meme that involving George Floyd was circulated among the Manchester Police Department, I believe on police equipment. It was seen by at least 5 supervisors. I could be wrong, but at least more than 2 supervisors.
Me too, right.
Was not reported until an upstanding officer finally did report it, and then an investigation took place. But the people who circulated this offensive racist meme and the supervisors who saw it and did nothing about it, some of them were promoted. I can't even believe it. I think that is wrong. I think there should have been suspensions and demotions. These are people carrying badges and guns in the streets of my city, and I'm going to stop editorializing, and I'm going to ask you to comment. You were involved in that. How did that go?
So
Did we gain anything? I hope.
I think we gained. I saw it as a teachable moment, and I give the department credit for once the issue was surfaced, taking action to put this officer on notice and give him training. And I like to think, we're all human. We all make mistakes. This officer went through training, and using the policies and procedures of the department, the chief felt that he was reformed enough to be promoted. And so I have faith that that's what happened, that the officer learned a lesson, and I think a lot of people learned a lesson from what happened.
Well, that's important. I mean, there's a lot of learning that has to get done, and it's going to be one step at a time.
Right. And so, we don't penalize someone who's young for their life, the rest of their life, for doing something stupid. We have to learn from that. And that person is now going to actually recognize when discrimination happens a lot more than he would have if he hadn't had that experience. The supervisors are another part, though.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Because the supervisors, to my knowledge, I don't think anything happened to them. And I sent a quick note to the chief to ask, so what happened to the supervisors? And I haven't heard back yet. So I'm not sure where things stand with the supervisors, although I'm sure because the officer had a disciplinary action against him, and the fact that the person who reported the meme being posted indicated that he didn't feel that he could even report it to his supervisors. He had to go over their head.
That's the issue,
report,
isn't it?
Right? So there's a culture here that is still in question. And cultures, we know, culture takes a long time to be created, so it takes a long time to change. So the question is, what's going to happen to change the culture such that everyone sees that meme and doesn't send it out to everybody else, doesn't republish it, right? And there's hope that because this officer got disciplined and had to go through training, that the rest of the department got that message, but we don't know.
Well, speaking of training, in our discussion before the show,
Yeah.
I learned that there were some cuts to the police standards and training curriculum, and where did they choose to cut? They cut in this issue of recognizing discrimination and
Yep.
tell us a little bit about that, please. This is news to me, and I think our viewers would be surprised to hear this.
Right. So I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, but there used to be 8 hours of training on diversity.
I raise my eyebrows again at that. It should be 24.
And eight is not enough. I mean, I do this work with organizations all the time, and I can tell you, to really do this training around bias, you need a good 3 days to 5 days. But there were 8 hours, right? And because of budget cuts from the legislature, that number got cut down to 2 hours. 2 hours of training on bias, which is totally unacceptable. So when the governor formed the Commission on Law Enforcement Community Accountability and Transparency, which he asked me and I had the honor of serving on, that was one of the first topics that we tackled, and we said, this cannot be. We cannot have just 2 hours worth of training on this. So one of our 48 recommendations was that training be increased to hopefully 16 hours.
Not the 24 to 40 that you think are necessary.
Not the 24 to 40.
So let's cut it short, but it's better than nothing.
But let's increase it.
How many police were certified and are out walking the streets on 2 hours of training?
Well, so that's a great question.
Are they going to go back, or are they going to be okay?
And this gets into how are police trained in this state. And there are, when Lee Act was working, 264 law enforcement agencies in the state. 264 separate law enforcement agencies that had was referred to as arrest power, which means they can put somebody in jail, right? And they all have their own training budgets and regiments. Officers are supposed to have gone through police standards and training to be certified to be officers in the state of New Hampshire. But some of them, as you said, went through only that 2 hours worth of training. And I don't have the number of how many only went through the 2 hours.
It was a
versus how
rhetorical
many went
question,
through
but
the
some,
8
you
hours,
know.
but a great number of them did.
Yep.
And since the additional hours of training was just implemented, I think, just over 2 years ago now. So there were a number of years when people didn't have that much training. And it can show.
They're supervisors now.
Well, they're supervisors and above now. So one of the pushes is to have the local agencies make sure they send people to the PTSD training that does include those hours. There's also an effort with the recently formed New Hampshire Center for Equity and Justice that puts on bias training that hopefully law enforcement agencies will send their folks to get what they really need to understand bias and how to deal with it.
So is there evidence that this diversity training actually makes a difference?
I think there is evidence, but this gets into another issue that we're grappling with, is capturing data. We don't really have the data that lets us truly analyze whether the training is working.
Yeah.
We don't
Because by
track.
the time you get to a certain age, it's harder to learn things, you know?
It certainly
There's
is.
a lot of patterns from your youth that just tough to change.
Tough to change. So we don't have data on traffic stops in terms of race. We don't capture race data, and even when it is captured, we're very cognizant of the fact that some officers, and we don't want officers to guess what someone's race is, because they can guess wrong.
Yeah. You know, when we came in and started talking with you, Jim, and I asked you if you'd ever had to have the talk with maybe your father with you and you with your kids, and you said yes, you did.
Yes.
Was that in New Hampshire, or that's just so shocking to me that a black American who should be as American as anybody can be, God knows you've been here as long as the rest of us and longer than most, have to have this talk. Can you tell us about that and what that's led you to, how that changed the way you approach things?
Well, since I've always lived with it, I'm not sure it's changed the way I approach things. My father had to have the talk, and I grew up, as I said, in Charleston, South Carolina. And I'm old enough to remember the places on walls where there were the colors only or whites only signs.
Yeah.
My father would not let
within your
me,
lifetime and certainly within mine.
in our lifetimes, my father would not let me leave the house without being dressed almost like this every single time. So I've actually been a little more lenient on my kids. I let them go out not dressed up in a tie or a dress shirt, but I had to have
Can
the
you
talk
break it
with
down
them.
for us? Why is that? I think I know, but I don't want to guess.
Why did you get dressed?
Yeah.
So, and if you watched any of the old black and white movies or shows of the civil rights movement and the marches, they were all dressed up in coat and tie and hat and
They
Sunday
certainly
best
did.
as well.
They were
right?
dressed to the nines, as they used to say.
And it has to do with respect,
yeah.
right? So if you look like you are deserving of respect, you're more likely to get respect. And you're more likely to not be seen as dangerous.
Clothes make the man.
Right? So if you dress with a hoodie and hood over, you look like you're somebody who's suspicious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that's why dressing nicely is really important, even today.
You know, bells are ringing in my head. My grandfather was a truck driver. He drove a truck, but he never left the house without a tie. And it was for that reason. It was the issue of respect. It wasn't a racial thing. It was a totally different issue.
Yes.
But it was that idea that our fathers had about what it was to show respect and to be respectable.
So now you're bringing something in that I think is really important for us to also talk about, and that is that some of this is racial in nature and some of it's not, right? The notion of respect and looking like you deserve respect and deserve to be treated respectfully is cross-race.
I think that's true.
And race simply amplifies that.
I see what you're saying.
right?
Yep.
So we need to teach respect in general, not just about race and or about gender or about disability, but in general, we need to be respectful to everybody. And that'll go a long way to solving a lot of things,
Yeah.
a lot of the problems we have.
Well, I guess we're the only country that, has defined itself in the beginning as equality for all, and we're still trying to get there. And, I think people like you, Jim, are making a real difference on this and the NAACP. I thought it might be worthwhile just commemorating the recently celebrated 58th, anniversary of the
Anniversary.
Bloody March over the bridge at
Selma.
the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I learned the other day that bridge is named for a Confederate general, was a
Edmund
Ku Klux
Pettus.
Klan dragon or whatever, big wheel in the Ku Klux Klan, and they haven't ever renamed it. It's still the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and I was thrilled to see the people that went there, including President Biden, and joined the march across
Yes.
that bridge.
Yes.
I think the Edmund Pettus Bridge has taken on, the name has taken on an entirely different meaning from its original intent.
Maybe that's the reason. Maybe
You know,
that's the reason, because we know now that we should not be celebrating Confederate generals and Ku Klux Klan, anybody, especially leaders. But did we do anything to celebrate that event here in New Hampshire? And
We did indeed. Last Sunday, we had a march across the Bridge Street Bridge, not too far from here.
oh, I'm sorry, I missed it.
In celebration of that and just recognition. And it was really interesting to do the march. If you've never been in a march before, you get to experience some of what it was like. I mean, that the danger's not there of being clubbed.
Well, think of the courage of those people.
All that.
They knew they were in danger, didn't they? They had to know it was
they
terribly
knew.
dangerous what they were doing.
And what you learn is, for marches like that, there's preparation, there's planning,
Yeah.
there's training on being nonviolent, even in the face of violence.
And that was one of the great things about Dr. Martin Luther King, wasn't it? He understood all that, and he provided the leadership and the skills to people with a lot of good Confederates. It was an inspiring thing. It really was, and we got a long way to go, but that was a signal moment, was it not?
It was a signal moment, and one of the things that I learned in studying about that march is that it was the first march that happened after Dr. King had been awarded the Nobel Prize.
I did not know that.
And that's probably why it was such a popular and such a telling point in time. He just won the prize, so eyes were all on him. Whatever he did, the eyes of the world were on
And
it.
that is the point that hit home for me. That the footage of the aftermath of that
Yes.
went like wildfire across the country.
Right,
And
right.
people who were sleepy, maybe not awake, woke up, and it really ignited the movement.
Right.
If I'm remembering, I lived through it, so it's not history to me. But I seem to remember that it was there, but then it was a much more popular movement in places outside the South.
Right. The TV cameras showing that, you can't unsee that.
Critical that the TV cameras were there and to show what happened.
And we've seen right through to George Floyd and all of these other incidences where the
Absolutely,
cameras are the thing that
absolutely,
makes the
absolutely.
difference,
Right.
aren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
And what's also interesting is that because that went national, President Johnson actually went to, and this is the other piece that I learned studying this, there were 3 attempts to cross the bridge. The first one, they turned back. The second one, they turned back. The third one, though, happened because after the second time, Lyndon Johnson went in front of Congress and said that he supported the marchers crossing that bridge.
Yeah.
And the third time they were able to cross.
Lyndon Johnson
That's how
would
progress
be
is made.
considered
Hit the wall,
would be
hit the wall.
considered one of our absolutely greatest presidents, except for his foreign policy mistakes in a place called Vietnam.
Yeah.
I mean, he destroyed a legacy which was so rich and wonderful, and just an amazing thing.
Well, being from Texas, they say only he could have done it.
I think
Right,
that's probably
right.
true.
Probably
Yeah,
true.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, but the point is, it got done. I'm disappointed. We're getting close to the end here, but
yeah.
as I live my life, I never thought that when I reached this age, I would see what I consider a backslide, and we've talked about it.
Yeah,
the curve.
that's troubling. That's very troubling.
I never expected, I knew that there were reluctant participants in the new society we were trying to build, but I never thought that they would be given this blanket permission to be a-holes, which is what's going on. And I'm sorry,
technical
folks,
term there.
I'm
Technical
trying to
term, right.
reserve, but all the other words don't work for me. It's just a matter of being mean-spirited and free to do so. And without any need to show the respect that we just talked about.
Right,
It's
right.
gone to some of these people. And to people who grew up with it, and like myself, who tried to maintain it in our lives, we don't know how to deal with that. That's such a foreign thing. Can you touch on that a little bit? I mean, do you see what I'm seeing?
So I think,
or are you more optimistic,
there are points of optimism. I think this goes back to we're not taught to be respectful in school. Our education system has failed us in that regard. And unless
After all this effort at diversity and sensitivity training, we're still failing?
I say the education system is failing.
Yes, that's what I
Right,
meant.
yes, and we don't have a lot of it. Well, we haven't had a lot of it until George Floyd being even talked about in the schools, and then we have the Freedom from Discrimination Act, which gets passed as part of HB 2 in the last legislative session,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
means we can't talk about many of the things that we need
Well,
to
there's
talk
a
about.
whole bunch of things we're not supposed to talk about now. Transgender
All of the protected
rights,
classes.
all those things that are equal, as important, I would
Is
say.
that being challenged by anybody?
It's been challenged. There is actually a bill going through the House right now, HB 61, I believe it is, to repeal that act.
Yeah, which was put through in the trailer bill, which you
And the
have
trailer
to
bill.
pass.
Right.
That's
And-
where all that stuff gets put in the trailer
And
bill.
poor governor, he had to make a choice: either not pass the budget.
I
or-
don't say
or
poor
pass
governor, but he
No, I
vetoed a
don't-
budget
I don't-
before.
I don't either.
He's
This-
vetoed
this
budgets
is true.
before. He could have done it. He had no
could have
spine.
done it again. I absolutely agree.
Right. But
Maybe you can't say that, but we can because we have nothing to lose.
So there's another thing I would like to get you to talk a little bit about the NAACP here. You're active at the city level. You're relating with the police all the time.
Yes.
About the problem, maybe some troublesome police officers. Are you also active with the what's happening in Concord with the legislature? Do you go up and testify a lot? What's happening?
I do go up and testify, and I have to be careful because I really can only go up and testify with positions that the NAACP National has taken, or that I have personal knowledge of. And because I served on the Lee Act Commission, I have a little more latitude than the other branch presidents do because I was brought into the statewide level issues by the governor himself. So I do actually go up and testify occasionally on issues, and I did for HB 61. I did for HB 544, which was the original Divisive Concepts Bill, for HB 2 and a number of others. I do go up and testify.
What does it
that's
do to
good.
your heart to look around this country and see white supremacy organizations active, to see churches, taking white supremacist positions, supposedly Christian churches? How do you? I know how I feel about it, but I just would like to.
You probably both feel the same. I'm
It
guessing.
breaks my heart in one sense, and then in another sense, it's been happening all my life, and I've expected it. And it's really amazing to me how people can say that they're followers of Jesus, who the tenet of Jesus is to protect the marginalized,
Yeah, he did
to
that a lot.
support the marginalized.
According to the Bible,
right?
he did that a lot.
Yet these folks who say they're Christians are not doing that. They're not following that. And that's really unfathomable to me, that they can say they're Christians, followers of Jesus, and yet their actions belie that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually causing schisms in some churches,
It's
Yeah.
absolutely causes schisms.
Yeah, well, we
which
had
is serious business, you know.
we had churches break apart over the issue of slavery, in our history. It's the Baptists were one great example.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I'm going to ask you another national. I'm sorry. Bob,
Go ahead.
I've
No.
been monopolizing this.
I'm just enjoying his company so much.
Another national question.
Mm-hmm.
We have one of the two parties who is going through its own schism, it
Yes,
seems.
yes, yes.
And a large component, the current standard bearers of that party, who have marginalized the old ones, support this racism, this white supremacy. I'm going to bring up an example. There's a committee. It's a very large committee in the House of Representatives. It's the House Oversight Committee. Its job is to oversee the executive branch, the government of the United States. That's what
Right.
it does on our behalf.
Right. Right.
A proposed statement against white supremacy, 2 paragraphs, 2 sentences long. And I'll read it. We, members of the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, together denounce white nationalism and white supremacy in all its forms, including the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. These hateful and dangerous ideologies have no place in the work of the United States Congress or our committee. 26 Republicans, Brendan, can you put the picture up of the letter? Should have given him a little bit more of a heads up, but
Here he is. He's
you
quick.
can see the
is.
blank spaces where 26 Republicans, not a single Republican could sign on to that statement,
Right.
That's
which is a
appalling.
baseline statement
appalling,
from which we ought to be working.
Right. Right.
Appalling.
Please, we've only got 3 minutes, but can you give us a quick comment on what does that say about our Congress and about one of the major parties of this country? There are Republicans here in New Hampshire, in Manchester.
I think
How do
it's-
they feel about this?
I think it says that we have a number of people in Congress who are out for themselves and keeping their power. And they are afraid that if they sign on to anything that goes against what their base says they should be thinking about and advocating for, they will lose that power.
Yeah. So I want to give you just a quick chance to wrap up because we're here at the end and we could do another hour easily, Jim.
Sure.
But what are the major things you want to accomplish going forward for the NAACP or for you personally as a proud Black American?
Well, as the head of an organization, I'm always looking for membership. So I want to get more members joining the organization because there's safety in numbers, there's strength in numbers, as the saying goes, and we need as many people in our discussions for as many different perspectives as possible. So one of my major goals is to increase the membership of the branch, our branch, and all of the branches. So we can bring
Well, I can
those
help with that.
perspectives. Thank you very much for joining. I guess another really major area that I'd like to see us make some more headway in is awareness of how to be civil in civic engagement.
Yeah. And let's get the history and civics education up in our public schools. Let's learn about the promise of America and that great as America is that we haven't achieved the promise that we were intended to have.
And if we can't get it in the public schools, let's get it any way we can.
Oh, we got to get it in the public schools. It's got to be in the public schools.
Well,
Okay.
then we have a political fight on our hands, don't we?
Yes,
We
indeed. Yes, indeed.
all the time. It's all political fights. Jim, thank you so much for coming in. I know it was short
discussion.
notice.
Thank
It
you.
was delightful. I knew it would be, and it was been terrific. And we're so glad that you could join us. And we'll be back next week, folks, with another edition of the Progress Report.
Thanks for watching, folks.
Yep.
See you next
Bye.
week.